It was kind of more of a mind game in Dark Souls 1. And I'm talking about Dark Souls 1 because it's really nostalgic, trying to like put in perspective what it's like to switch between these games, because we all leapfrog through the games over the years and they're all vastly different. Dark Souls 1 was so long ago that it feels like a fever dream to me. Like, I think I was like 14. I sometimes question if that game was real because it was so good. I loved it. I loved the shit out of it. And with each progressive entry into the series, I've liked it a little less. Even though the PvP was the best. It peaked at Dark Souls 2. And Dark Souls 2 had a lot different than Dark Souls 1. I'm not going to go into the intricacies of that. Then we get to Dark Souls 3. I'm like, man, this PvP kind of sucks, but I'm going to play it because that's what the cool kids are doing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And, when I got to Elden Ring, a lot of it does kind of sort of feel the same as Dark Souls 3, but with more weight behind it.
Actually, Maya, you've only recently gotten into Dark Souls 3 PvP, haven't you?
Yeah, I think I've did 2 streams of Dark Souls 3 PvP, one being, like the most recent being yesterday. And I gotta say, it felt a bit weird coming from Elden Ring. But
doubt.
it made me appreciate Elden Ring a bit more. So one thing that I was playing around with was Claymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I was at like soul level 60 in the woods. And every time I played against somebody running a like quick weapon like a curved sword or a thrusting sword, I would like just get obliterated because of me no poisey, but they can just like mash R1, get 2 hits in.
Yeah.
Spacing also felt weird in Dark Souls 3, but maybe it's just because I haven't gotten used to it yet.
I think the
Spacing
main
was
difference
weird.
there... Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I have a habit of talking
No
on
worries.
impulse.
Same.
I'm an impulsive dude. I'm sure people figured this out. But, yeah, spacing was weird in Dark Souls 3. I have to address that. I don't know why it felt weird. It just always did. And, you know, in Elden Ring, there's a lot more forward momentum behind the attacks, and they're a lot more weighty. So I think that's what's fucking you up in terms of spacing, is maybe you're used to different. I can't really describe it, honestly, but you just talked about it, and I was like, yeah, it did feel different.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think I know how I can articulate it. So Better Griff, like a dude that I really enjoy playing with and who's hanging out on the channel from time to time, he always talks about like how passive play gets rewarded in Dark Souls 3, whereas it's not as bad as in Elden Ring. So I noticed like when it was like a 1v1 situation and I was the person that engaged first, I usually like whiffed the attack because there's not that much forward momentum compared to Elden Ring, and then I just get whiff punished, right? So that's one thing that I really started noticing and appreciating Elden Ring for actually being able to play more aggressively and not get punished as hard.
I should have said something about that too. Elden Ring feels a lot more aggression oriented than Dark Souls 3 did. I used to be one of those pontiff duelists. Do you know about that culture?
Yep, I know. I remember the ones.
I was
Kinda.
at first in the early days of Dark Souls 3, I just fucking hated the invasions for reasons I mentioned. And I was the dude that used to hang around in pontiff. I wouldn't summon people, but I would get summoned, and then I would, sometimes I'd get wrecked by somebody that was good. Sometimes I would shred through 8 dudes, and it felt really rewarding because people were standing up there watching you. It was really like a nice culture. I liked it. It was interesting, and I like to throw shit pots at people when they lose. But that's beside the point. Fuck, what was I saying? What was I talking about?
You got carried away there. But no, I
Dude,
think both of you are right in the sense that the main difference between Dark Souls 3 and Elden Ring's combat is that forward momentum is so much more easy to achieve.
That's what I was getting at. Yeah, in the Pontiff Arena, I noticed that being the more passive person guarantees you a win, like 80% of the time. Like, being aggressive was not smart in Dark Souls 3, honest to God. And then when you transition to Elden Ring, everything has just got more oomph behind it. You know, every attack carries you forward more. Especially, have you seen how far forward the curved greatsword running R1s carry you? Have you noticed that?
It's the new heavy thrusting sword for that purpose.
Yes, it's fucking amazing. Even the dual straight swords. With my dual straight swords, they're one of the shorter weapons in the game. Yet you can outspace some spears with them because they have such a forward step into them. And I love that. Like, that's great, because I've always been an aggressive player. You know, I don't like to dilly-dally, and people have noticed that about me. Even if it's not smart to always be aggressive, I kind of tend to be that way. And I got punished for that in Dark Souls 3. In Elden Ring, you're kind of winning because you do that. I don't know, I saw some other content creator talking about how Elden Ring rewarded passivity. And I was like, dude, you obviously never played Dark Souls 3, because it's way better in that department
I will say he's not wrong in that passivity is still rewarded. It's rewarded less and in a different way. In Dark Souls 3, passivity was rewarded because you could punish pretty much everything.
True.
But passivity is rewarded here because so much of engaging is a risk. You either engage properly or you engage badly. And the person who has the aggression advantage very rarely cedes it unless they muck up.
Initiative.
Yeah, initiative is exactly what it is. The battle isn't so much between like a back and forth like it was in Dark Souls 3. It's far more a battle over the initiative, and if you keep the initiative, you win in pretty much no small way. It's kind of the definer as to who wins, like what's happening now.
You're right, and I have to add another thing that's different from Dark Souls 3 to Elden Ring. And it's that it's really easy to keep your initiative because it's so much easier to roll catch in Elden Ring. Now, a lot of people don't really realize it, but the Dark Souls 3 roll was way better than the one in Elden Ring, right? It carried you further. I think it was faster, and I feel like it might have had more iframes. I'm not the guy that studies frame data, so I don't really know, but I've heard people say this, and the roll was better in Dark Souls 3. In Elden Ring, it's shorter distance. And at the same time, it seems like they've deliberately timed everything to roll catch. It's like every single thing in the game has some kind of roll catch. So if you can maintain the initiative by continuously roll catching someone, it's just so much easier to do that in Elden Ring. I don't know if anybody agrees with me there, but it does feel way easier to roll catch, and it feels like PvP is centered around roll catching. It's not just PvP either. All the bosses are designed to roll catch you. All the magic.
That is a fact. That is a fact, at least.
It's not PvP exclusive, but it is affecting PvP in a positive way. Because in Dark Souls 3, it kind of felt different to roll catch people. For one, a lot of weapons couldn't do it, and when you did do it, they had a roll poise. Do you remember that?
Yeah, that's right.
I didn't like the roll poise that much, to be honest with you. But it just feels better in Elden Ring because you can catch people in these fucking chains or roll catches. And that rewards you for being aggressive, and it punishes the person panic rolling. You know what I mean?
I think a lot of the issues that come as far as aggression asymmetry in Elden Ring goes is, like, only some of the weapons have that notable forward momentum. Like, axes and hammers, for example, are notably and woefully inadequate in their forward momentum, even in their running attacks.
You are right about that. You are absolutely right. Those things need help, man, and they can easily fix. I'm kind of a historical nerd, right? And I feel like they could make most of these shitty weapon classes a lot better by following what they did in real life. Now, the thing about axes and hammers and all of that was that they were kind of slow and unwieldy because they were top heavy, but they did a lot of damage to people when you actually hit them. They were hammers in particular were designed to kill knights because you couldn't kill a knight with a bladed weapon. You couldn't get through some armor with a sword. They would just glance off. But why don't they just make hammers stagger pretty much everybody and do more damage against people in armor? And I know they already do have a bonus against people in armor, or the armors have less defense against them, right? Blunt damage.
Yeah, I sort of semi-armor piercing, but not really.
Yes, they can leave the movesets for hammers and axes shitty. They can do that as long as they whomp the fuck out of armored foes. I would be happy with that.
I don't think that will be the case. I think even in that sense, people will just default to the higher damage weapons with forward momentum, because the main problem with the hammers and the axes is that you can't hit anyone with them. And if you can't hit anyone, it doesn't matter how much damage they do.
I suppose it is kind of hard to hit people with axes and hammers, but I feel like maybe the weakness of their moveset is overstated. It's not that hard to hit people with them. It's really not. They're kind of
you can. Like, it's not impossible, but it's so much harder than the other weapons that choosing them is a deliberate choice to handicap yourself. And that's all it really needs to be.
I think it's a bit... what's the best way I can compare it with? I think the Dismounter or like the Great Curved Swords pre-patch, I played with those before they got buffed, and I always felt like they were a weapon class that you have to play defensively. So the best way for me to play a Dismounter pre-109 or 108 or whenever they were buffed was just stand in one position and then use the crouch R1 to like just counter whatever the opponents throw at you. So like play more defensively and use it that way. Whereas like other weapons would be more like beneficial to play aggressively, like a heavy thrusting sword, something with more forward momentum. And I think if you play like colossal weapons, obviously they still need the buff in my opinion, like just a speed buff maybe. You can still play.
I think they need a speed buff and a damage buff.
Yeah.
I think I agree with what May is saying. Also, it is kind of hard.
I mean,
to
otherwise
understand.
everything will just be like the same, right? Like if every weapon has like the same forward momentum, you basically just playing the same game with different weapons, but every weapon does the same thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's not like every weapon needs to be the same. It just needs to have sufficient forward momentum.
Yeah, a lot of people would say that would be a bad thing. A lot of people argue that instead of nerfing good things, you should make the shitty things better. And that's kind of the camp I'm in. But at the same time, that creates what they call a power creep, where everything just keeps getting better and better. So I'm not really sure. But hear me out about the hammers and axes. What if they gave them good active poise? Like, it was hard to stagger you in a swing, so they kind of sort of acted like the great swords do. What do you think about that?
I think that would be a big boon. I think adding just a lot more hyper armor to a lot more weapons would only be good for this game. Because, as you say, like, aggression is rewarded much more, and I think it could stand to be rewarded just a little more, but not in the way that it's currently rewarded. It's currently rewarded because you can put your enemy on the back foot, but I think it should be rewarded a little bit more in the sense that you can at least get damage through trades and through like difficult situations where things like hit stun and the low poise values of a lot of things currently just don't allow you to. You can't really trade into much with hammers or axes or anything like that, whereas it's sort of the way its moveset is set up, it kind of asks you to trade into stuff with them, so it's kind of hard to know what way they were intended to be used.
I've noticed that it seems like when you hit the dodge button, sometimes the game just doesn't want to accept that in Elden Ring, and that wasn't so much of an issue in Dark Souls 3.
That is a fact. I've seen Amir and a couple of others post a lot of data on exactly when dodge input drops happen, and it's often when you're blocking. You'll notice that a lot of the pros don't do the block dash anymore, and that's because blocking while sprinting and then going into dodge often drops the input for no reason.
Yes. That's an annoying aspect, and they should do something about it. I don't know why it is that way. One thing I've always prayed for is that if two reds that were not summoned but they're invading, they shouldn't be able to hit each other. They should be able to gank just as hard as the hosts and phantoms are. I'm not saying there should be, as many invaders as there are host people, but we probably shouldn't be able to hit each other like that, I don't think.
I think once the game's like this, where there are so many huge AoEs and projectiles, it's not the same kind of balancing act as it was in Dark Souls 3. In Dark Souls 3, everything was much closer to you, so being able to hit your fellow invader, that was just a mild inconvenience, whereas here, like, if your co-invader is spamming waves of piss, then, like, good feckin' luck.
No, sorry, I actually wanted to bring some nuance into this, because over time, my position on this has changed a bit in terms of like should reds be able to hit each other. from I think they should be able to hit each other to yeah, they should be able to hit each other, but only because in the past few months I've exclusively done Taunter's Tongue runs with chat. And Elden Ring invasion wise I think is actually quite balanced if you try to like have a environment that's set up fairly. So that means your Taunter's Tongue, you have like one phantom, and then you can get 2 reds. And in a scenario like that, usually the people hosting are at a disadvantage. And if my phantom dies, the only way I can survive with all of the NPCs and stuff is to just make sure that the 2 reds hit each other while trying to gank me. So yeah, that's my
I can see that.
perspective on that.
This is the problem. I can get behind that. I'm still not sure which side of the camp I fall on. I still feel like maybe we shouldn't be able to hit each other, but I don't know. I have to think about it more.
My view on that is that this is why we need covenants. I believe that there should be friendly fire between different covenants, but like,
yes.
For example, if you were on the same team, if there are 2 bloody fingers, no, they shouldn't be able to hit each other. They're on the same team.
Oh my god, you're right. You're a fucking genius. But
that's just my perspective. But like, I know that this is a pretty contentious one.
Why is there no fucking covenants?
To be fair, lore-wise, I mean, Vara invades you at Morrowind Palace, even though you're technically a bloody finger, so...
Actually, that is a good fucking point. Like, maybe only the actual Bloody Finger Covenant can friendly fire, because they're basically like the Mad Phantoms from previous games, right? Where it's just like, as long as I kill something, I'm happy.
Man, I don't give a shit about VAR. Okay, fuck VAR. I think that it should be people in the same covenant can't hit each other, and Recusants and Bloody Fingers are opposing factions. So you should be able to hit each other. And that would be a cool dynamic right there. I think that would be the most fun way to do this. And I just gotta bitch about the fact that there's no covenants, man. I gotta bitch about it. It's fucking stupid. I know it's because they didn't finish the game. That is the reason. But if they don't add them...
They looked in the files and they did find spaces for like covenant items and such with the multiplayer update, but nothing seemed to happen with them.
Hey, maybe they're adding them.
Could
if
be.
they don't add them, I'm gonna have an aneurysm.